Chapter 1, Cold Open, 16 years old in chains. The hallway was colder than outside. Not the kind of cold that comes from the weather, but the kind that seeps into your bones when you realize the system just swallowed you whole. 16 years old. That's all he was when the cuffs locked around his wrists. 16, standing in front of a judge who didn't look at him like a child, but like a case file. The gavel came down. 10 years. The words didn't even sound real at first. They floated in the air like smoke, twisting until they sank into his chest. 10 years meant grown men years. 10 years meant he wasn't going to see the world again until his 20s. He tried to keep his face stone cold. But inside, his heart was racing. His mama was sitting 2 rows back, clutching her purse like it was her lifeline. Tears rolled down her face, and she whispered, "Lord, please." But God felt far away that morning. The ride. They let him out of the courtroom, shackles on his ankles clinking against the tile. Every step echoed like the hallway was laughing at him. He wanted to scream. Wanted to run. But the cuffs said otherwise. In the van, the seat was metal, the windows barred. He stared out, watching D.C. pass by in a blur, corner stores he used to run to, basketball courts where he should have been hooping, alleys where he used to post up with the wrong crew. Now, none of that mattered. The city kept moving, but he was stuck. First night. When they processed him, it was like cattle. Strip. Shower. Jumpsuit. Number. No name. Just inmate. They walked him down the tier. Doors clanged. Men shouted from their cells. Some laughed. Some threatened. Some just watched. 16 years old. Surrounded by wolves. When that steel door slammed behind him, the sound dug into his ears like a nail. The cell was smaller than his bedroom back home. Concrete slab for a bed, toilet in the corner, no privacy, no warmth. He sat down, hands shaking, staring at the chipped paint on the wall. Reality hit. This was it. Fear. That first night, he didn't sleep. He couldn't. Every sound made him jump, footsteps outside, a scream echoing down the tier, the rattle of keys. He pressed his back to the wall, knees pulled tight, trying to look tough even though nobody could see him. He thought about his mama. Wondered if she was sitting at the kitchen table, crying over bills and praying for a son who wasn't coming home. He thought about his pops, absent, ghost, never showed up. Maybe if Pops had been there, things would have been different. But it was too late to play what if. The wait. He kept replaying the moment in the courtroom. How the judge barely looked at him. How the prosecutor painted him like a monster, not a kid. How his lawyer told him to take the deal, like 10 years was a favor. 10 years. By the time he got out, his friends would be grown, maybe dead, maybe locked too. By the time he got out, the world would forget his name. The walls pressed in. His chest felt heavy. He whispered to himself, "This can't be my life. This can't be it." But the echo of the cell answered back, "It is." Foreshadow. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of the hardest journey of his life. Prison would test him. Break him. Nearly kill him. But prison would also be the place where God would find him. Not in the courtroom. Not in the van. Not even on that first night. But soon. Because the same steel door that locked him in was the same door God was planning to walk through. 2. Childhood in D.C., roots and struggles. Before the gavel. Before the cuffs. Before the steel door slammed shut, there was a boy growing up in Washington, D.C. And in D.C., being born black in certain neighborhoods meant you were already stepping onto a battlefield. Mama's house. He came up in a house where love was loud but struggle was louder. His mama, a strong black woman with tired eyes, worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Morning shift, cooking at a nursing home. Evening shift, cleaning offices downtown. By the time she got home, Her hands were raw from chemicals, and her back screamed louder than her voice ever could. But she still made sure there was food on the table, even if it was just rice and beans with Kool-Aid. She did everything she could to raise him right. But love can't always shield you from the weight of the streets. The missing father. His pops. A ghost. Sometimes he'd hear stories about where his father might be, locked up, running with another woman, maybe dead. But the truth? Pops wasn't there. That absence was a hole. A wound. And boys in the hood learn quick, if you don't get protection and guidance at home, you'll go looking for it outside. And outside in D.C., the block was always recruiting. The block is a classroom. The cracked sidewalks and corner stores became his school. He learned how to throw hands before he learned to write an essay. He learned what colors meant. He learned which streets you could walk down, and which ones would eat you alive. The older boys on the block, chains swinging, sneakers spotless, pockets full of cash, they were the teachers. And they didn't hand out diplomas. They handed out trauma, guns, and quick lessons in survival. By the time he was 13, he wasn't a student anymore. He was a soldier. Temptations and first taste. The first time he saw a stack of money bigger than his mama's paycheck, it came from a hand-to-hand deal on the corner. A little bag, a quick exchange, and just like that, easy money. He remembered looking at those bills and thinking, why should I watch my mama kill herself for scraps when I can do this in one night? That thought was the devil's bait. Hooked him fast. Soon, the corner store clerk knew his name not because he was a kid buying candy, but because he was part of the crew hanging out front, intimidating customers. Soon, the school principal called his mama not for grades, but for fights. Soon, the police started recognizing his face. Mama's tears. One night, his mama found a wad of cash in his shoebox. Where'd this come from? She asked, holding it up like it was poison. He shrugged, lied, mumbled something about odd jobs. She wasn't stupid. She slapped the money on the table and shouted, "Boy, this ain't how I raised you. You gonna end up just like your daddy if you don't stop." Her voice cracked, and the tears came fast. That night, he hated himself for making her cry. But he also hated the feeling of being broke. And hate mixed with pride is gasoline on fire. So the next day, he was right back outside. The slide into the life. It didn't happen overnight. It was slow, subtle, like water dripping into a crack until it splits the concrete. First, he was the lookout. Then, he was holding. Then, he was moving. By 15, he had a reputation. He wasn't just a kid anymore, he was part of the ecosystem. And in DC, once you're in the ecosystem, it's almost impossible to get out. Violence comes early. The first time he saw someone shot, it wasn't on TV. It was on the very block where he played tag as a kid. Gunfire cracked. People scattered. And when the smoke cleared, there was a body on the ground. Blood pooling into the cracks of the sidewalk. He froze. That image burned into his brain like a tattoo. Part of him wanted to run home, crawl into his mama's arms, and forget it ever happened. But another part of him, the part that was already numb, just said, "This is normal." That's how the streets kill you before they ever put a bullet in you. His mama's prayer. What he didn't know was that every night, while he was out roaming, his mama was kneeling by her bed whispering, "Lord, please cover my son. Don't let him die out there. Don't let prison be the only thing that stops him." She didn't know those prayers were seeds. Seeds that would take years, steel bars, and God's timing to sprout. Closing foreshadow. At 16, the life he thought made him a man would make him a number. The corner would trade him for concrete walls. And the very streets that promised him power would leave him powerless. But God was already listening to Mama's prayers. And God was already writing a story that would prove every tear she cried wasn't wasted. Chapter 3, The Streets, Gang Life and Temptations. The hood never sleeps. Even when the rest of DC was shutting down for the night, the block was wide awake, dice games clattering, bottles cracking, music thumping out of old Buicks, and whispers of money moving in the shadows. For a teenager hungry for identity, that noise was a song. And he started to dance to it. First taste of respect. He remembered the first time one of the older gang members clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Lil man, you solid." It wasn't just words, it was validation. His father never said he was proud of him. Teachers wrote him off. But here, one nod from an OG felt like a diploma. It hooked him worse than any drug could. From that point on, he chased that feeling of belonging. Initiation nights. The gang didn't give out memberships for free. You had to prove yourself. One night they told him, "It's your turn. You want to be down for real? Then show us." He remembered the smell of liquor heavy in the air, the tension in his chest, the way his hands trembled as they shoved him into the circle. Fists came flying, one after another, boots stomping his ribs, the world spinning. When it was over, he spat blood and staggered to his feet. They handed him a rag with their colors. You and now. Pain and pride mixed together. He'd just been baptized into a false brotherhood. Money flows. The block was a marketplace, not for groceries, not for clothes, but for poison. He started with lookout duty, then graduated to runner. Soon, he was pocketing more cash in a week than his mama made in 2. Shoes. Chains. Nice jackets. Suddenly, he didn't have to be embarrassed at school anymore. Girls started noticing him. Teachers started whispering about him. Cops started watching him. Money was quick. Respect was quicker. But consequences? They were just around the corner. The guns. The first time they handed him a pistol, it felt heavy. He wasn't even sure if he could pull the trigger. But in the streets, hesitation gets you killed. "Hold it like you mean it," one OG barked. He raised it, fingers shaking, trying to look tough. Inside, he was terrified. That gun became a symbol of fear, of power, of the point of no return. Violence becomes routine. At first, he swore he wouldn't use it. But the streets don't care about your vows. A rival crew rolled up one night, words turned to threats, threats turned to shots. He remembered ducking behind a car, his heart thundering, then squeezing the trigger without thinking. The sound was deafening. The smoke burned his nose. When the adrenaline cleared, somebody was bleeding on the ground. He told himself it wasn't his fault. Told himself he had no choice. But deep down, he knew another piece of his soul had just died. Mama notices the change. His mama could feel the shift in him. He came home later. His knuckles stayed bruised. His shoebox got heavier with cash. His eyes looked colder. One night, she grabbed his face and pleaded, "Baby, please. This ain't you. I can see the devil trying to take you. Don't let him win." But he pulled away, mumbled, "I got this, Ma," and walked out. Her prayers grew louder, but so did the streets. Running with the wrong crew. By 15, he wasn't just a follower anymore. He had younger kids looking up to him, following his lead. He taught them how to hold, how to move, how to intimidate. The cycle repeated, fatherless boys making other boys fatherless. And for a moment, he thought he was winning. He thought the streets were his kingdom. Close call. One night, he and his crew hit a corner store. Masks on, guns out, voices shaking but loud. The cashier froze. A customer screamed. He grabbed the cash from the drawer, heart hammering, but when they ran out, blue lights lit up the block. He barely escaped, ducking through alleys, vaulting fences, lungs burning. By the time he got home, sweat dripping down, he laughed it off with his crew. But that night in bed, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't stop thinking, what if I didn't make it? That question haunted him, even if he never admitted it. Foreshadow. Every crime stacked up like bricks. Every gunshot, every robbery, Every lie to his mama. He thought he was building a throne. But what he was really building was a cell. And soon, the streets were gonna collect their debt. Chapter 4, The Gavel, Courtroom and Sentencing. The sirens had finally caught up to him. It didn't matter how many alleys he ducked through, how many times he'd outrun blue lights, or how many nights he swore to himself, they ain't never catching me. The streets always collect. And one night, they collected him. The arrest. It was cold outside when the squad car screeched up. Guns drawn. Voices barking. Hands slammed against brick. 16 years old, but the cuffs clicked around his wrists like they were tailor-made. He wanted to act tough, to smirk, to throw out a line like, "Y'all got the wrong one." But his throat was dry. His chest was tight. And the truth was sitting heavy, they had the right one. They pushed his head down into the back of the cruiser. The cage between him and the front seat made it clear, freedom was gone. The holding cell. He sat in the holding cell, concrete bench cold under him, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Around him, older men cursed, slept, or stared at the floor. He was just a kid, but no one cared. The system didn't see a kid. It saw a case number. Hours dragged. When the guard finally called his name, his stomach flipped. He was about to see the judge. The courtroom. The courtroom was bigger than it looked on TV. Wood paneling. A seal above the judge's bench. Rows of strangers who came to watch someone else's downfall like it was entertainment. He scanned the crowd and saw her, his mama. Her face was swollen from crying. She clutched her Bible so tight the leather bent under her fingers. Her lips were moving, whispering a prayer even as tears streaked her cheeks. For the first time, he couldn't look her in the eye. The prosecutor's words. The prosecutor painted him like a monster. "This is not a misguided child," the man declared, pacing in front of the jury box. "This is a dangerous gang member. A criminal who has terrorized his community with robberies, violence, and weapons. He is a threat, and he must be dealt with accordingly." Each word hit like a hammer. Dangerous. Threat. Monster. 16 years old, but in that courtroom, he felt like he was already buried. The defense. His public defender tried. Talked about his age, about how he came from a broken home, about how prison would crush him instead of reform him. But her words felt small compared to the prosecutor's thunder. And when the judge leaned forward, glasses perched on the edge of his nose, the silence in the room felt like judgment before the sentence even came. The verdict. On the charges of armed robbery, gang activity, and possession of an illegal firearm. The words blurred. His ears rang. His chest pounded. Then the number came. 10 years. 10 years. Not 10 months. Not probation. 10 years. The sound of the gavel echoed like a gunshot. Bang. Mama's cry. His mama's cry broke the silence. A sound so raw, so full of pain, that even the bailiff looked away. "No, please, Your Honor. He's just a boy." But the judge didn't look up. Didn't respond. To him, this wasn't a son. This wasn't a child. It was just another file on his desk. The shackles. They cuffed his wrists again, chained his ankles, and led him away. The courtroom blurred. His mama reached out, Bible still in her hand, crying his name. He wanted to run to her. He wanted to promise he'd be okay. But the chains yanked him forward. The steel clanged. The door closed. Childhood was gone. Freedom was gone. The next 10 years of his life belonged to the state. The ride to prison. The van smelled like sweat and metal. The barred windows let him see pieces of D.C., neighborhoods he once claimed, stores where he once laughed, streets where he once felt alive. Now, those streets rolled by like strangers. He realized something then. The block didn't love him back. It never had. Foreshadow. The gavel may have sentenced him to 10 years, but prison itself was about to hand down a much harsher sentence. Nights where sleep wouldn't come. Fights where his life hung by a thread. Moments where despair would whisper, "End it." And yet, even in that darkness, even in those cells, God was waiting. Because the system may have written him off. But God hadn't. Chapter 5, Prison Intake, First Days in the Cell. The bus smelled like sweat, fear, and metal. He sat shackled, shoulder to shoulder with grown men who had murder in their eyes. Some stared straight ahead. Some grinned like they were already planning how to test the new kid. 16 years old. On his way to grown man prison. Arrival at the gate. The prison rose out of the ground like a monster, razor wire glinting under the floodlights, guard towers looming with rifles pointed down. The walls looked alive, breathing, ready to swallow him whole. When the bus doors hissed open, the guards shouted, "Move!" Boots clanged against steel steps. Chains rattled as one by one, they filed out. He tried to walk steady, but his knees betrayed him. He'd never been so scared in his life. Stripped. Inside, intake was humiliation on purpose. Guards barked orders like drill sergeants. Strip. Stand there. Arms out. Turn around. Squat. Clothes gone. Identity gone. Now he was just a number sewn into the back of a state-issued jumpsuit. They shaved his head. Took his shoelaces. Bagged his belongings. Whatever little pride he had left got stomped out right there on that cold intake floor. The gauntlet. They walked him down the tier. Metal doors clanged open and shut. Inmates pressed their faces to the bars, hollering, testing, laughing. Fresh meat. Lil homie ain't gone last a week. Better pick a side, shorty. Their voices bounced off the walls like bullets ricocheting. He kept his eyes forward, heart pounding. Every step felt like walking deeper into hell. The cell. The guard shoved him inside and the door slammed with a metallic boom that rattled his bones. The cell was barely big enough for 2 bunks, a toilet, and a sink. His cellmate, a huge, tatted-up man with a scar running across his cheek, looked him up and down and smirked. "You a baby," the man said, shaking his head. "You better learn quick." The silence that followed was louder than shouting. He sat on the lower bunk, staring at the wall. The paint was chipped, names carved deep into the concrete, ghosts of men who'd come before. First night. That first night, he didn't close his eyes once. Every sound was amplified. The rattle of keys. The bark of guards. The shouts of men cussing each other out across tiers. The metallic bang of someone slamming their fists against the bars. Somebody screamed down the hall, a scream that didn't sound like anger, but like pain. Then silence. He pulled the thin blanket up to his chin, knees tucked tight, body trembling. He wanted to cry, but he refused to let the tears fall. Not here. Not where weakness was blood in the water. The morning. When the lights blazed on at dawn, his eyes burned from staying awake. "Breakfast," a guard shouted. A tray slid through the slot, rubber eggs, cold toast, watery grits. He pushed it aside. His stomach was knotted too tight to eat. His cellmate devoured his own tray, then reached for his. "If you ain't eating it, I am." He learned quick, nothing went to waste inside. Not food. Not time. Not chances. The yard. Later, they herded the new inmates into the yard. Concrete field surrounded by fences topped with wire. Men lifted weights, played ball, smoked, plotted. He walked slow, eyes darting. He felt the stairs drilling into him. Too young. Too green. Too vulnerable. A group of older gang members, tattoos crawling up their necks, called him over. "Yo, lil homie. Who you run with?" He froze. His mouth went dry. "Answer wrong, you make enemies. Answer right, you make commitments you can't break." "I'm from DC," he finally muttered. They laughed. Everybody from somewhere, Shorty. Question is, who you riding with now? He didn't answer. They smirked and walked off. For now. Survival mode. Back in his cell, he sat on the bunk, staring at the Bible his mama had slipped into his bag before he left. The guards hadn't confiscated it. He ran his fingers over the cracked leather cover. He thought about opening it. Thought about reading. But then he shoved it back under the mattress. He wasn't ready. Not yet. Right now, survival meant fists, respect, and keeping your back against the wall. Foreshadow. That cell, that yard, that first night, it all carved fear into him. But it also carved questions. Was this really his life now? Was this what he was going to be for the next decade? The streets had promised him a kingdom. But all they gave him was a cage. And deep down, in the silence of that cell, a whisper was forming, one he didn't recognize yet. I'm not done with you. Chapter 6: Survival, Violence, Fights and Loneliness. Prison wasn't just about doing time. It was about surviving time. And for a 16-year-old, every day was a gamble. The first test. It didn't take long for the first test to come. He was standing in line for chow, tray in hand, when a bigger inmate, muscles stacked, tattoos crawling up his neck, shouldered him hard. The tray clattered to the floor, watery beans splattering across the concrete. The chow hall erupted in laughter. The man leaned down and growled, "Pick it up, Shorty." Every instinct told him to back down. But in prison, backing down was blood in the water. If you gave up once, you'd never eat in peace again. So he swung. Fists cracked against flesh. Trays flew. Guards shouted. Within seconds, they were on the floor, boots and batons raining down, guards dragging them apart. He left with a busted lip, swollen knuckles, and a trip to the hole. But he'd earned something money couldn't buy inside, a little respect. The hole. Solitary confinement was its own kind of death. 4 walls. 1 bunk. 1 toilet. Silence so loud it made his head ring. He counted cracks in the concrete. He talked to himself just to hear a voice. He scratched lines into the wall to keep track of days, but after a while, even the lines blurred. Sometimes at night, screams echoed from other cells. Men losing their minds. He pressed his hands against his ears, but the sound sank in anyway. The worst part wasn't the screams. It was the silence that came after. Back to the yard. When he came back out, the other inmates watched him differently. He'd thrown hands. He hadn't broken in the hole. But respect was a double-edged sword. It brought safety, but it also brought attention. Older gang members started circling him. "Lil homie, you roll with us, you good. Ain't nobody gonna touch you." The temptation was heavy. Being alone was dangerous. But joining meant signing away his soul. He stayed quiet. Watched. Waited. Nights that broke him. At night, when the cell block went dark, the fear crept in. His cellmate snored heavy, but he stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, thoughts racing. What if somebody stabbed me tomorrow? What if Mama gets sick and I can't be there? What if I never make it out? Some nights, tears slipped out. He buried his face in the thin pillow so no one would hear. Because in prison, crying could get you killed too. The politics. He learned quick, everything inside had politics. Who you sat with in the chow hall. Who you nodded to in the yard. Who you shared a cigarette with. One wrong move and you could end up in a war you didn't start. There was no neutral. Even silence could get you checked. He kept his circle small. Eyes sharp. Back always against the wall. Violence in the air. Violence wasn't an event in prison. It was the atmosphere. Fights broke out in the showers. Shanks got pulled in the yard. Rumors spread faster than the guards could catch them. One morning, the alarm blared. Guards rushed past his cell. Later he found out someone had been stabbed 7 times in the cafeteria. The next day, it was like nothing happened. Men played cards, laughed, lived, because violence was just Tuesday inside. Mama's letters. The only thing that kept him tethered was his mama's letters. She wrote in shaky handwriting, words pressed deep into the paper like she was carving prayers straight into the page. Son, I'm praying for you every night. God's got you, even if you don't see it yet. Don't give up. He'd read those letters until the ink smeared. Then read them again. Sometimes he wanted to believe her. Sometimes he wanted to laugh bitterly and toss them away. But he never did. Those letters were the only thing that reminded him he was still somebody's child. The breaking point. Weeks bled into months. The weight of it all, the violence, the fear, the loneliness, pressed harder and harder. One night, sitting on the edge of his bunk, he whispered to himself, I can't do 10 years like this. I can't. He stared at the Bible his mama had sent, still tucked under the mattress. His hands itched to pull it out. But pride said, not yet. You ain't ready to surrender. You still gotta survive. So he sat there, silent tears dripping onto the floor, trying not to make a sound. Foreshadow. He thought he was breaking. But really, he was being bent. Bent toward a moment he couldn't see yet, a night when the silence of prison would crack open and God himself would step in. For now, though, all he knew was survival. Chapter 7, Breaking Point, Hopelessness and Rock Bottom. The walls felt like they were closing in. Not just the physical walls, concrete and steel, but the invisible ones in his mind. The kind that pressed down until breathing felt like lifting a mountain. Nights that wouldn't end. Nights in prison dragged like years. He'd lie awake on his bunk, eyes tracing cracks in the ceiling, listening to the orchestra of pain around him, the echo of coughs, the whispers of men plotting, the occasional scream that ripped through the silence like a blade. But the worst sound was the sound inside his own head. You ain't getting out. This is your life now. 16 or 60, it don't matter, you'll die behind these walls. The weight of time. 10 years. That number looped through his brain like a broken record. He couldn't even picture what 10 years looked like. He hadn't even lived 10 years of freedom as a teenager, and now they wanted him to survive 10 more as a convict. His chest tightened whenever he thought about it. Panic attacks hit him like waves. He'd bury his face in the thin pillow so no one would hear him gasp for air. Because showing fear in prison was like leaking blood in shark water. Fights and fallout. He got into more fights. Some he won. Some he lost. Every scar told a story, but none of the stories ended good. Once, an older inmate pressed a shank against his ribs in the shower, whispering, "Pick a side, lil' man, or you won't make it." He stared back, heart pounding, pretending not to be scared. Somehow the man walked off. But that night, his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Violence was normal now. Fear was normal. Numbness was creeping him like poison. Mama's silence. Then the letters slowed down. At first, it was one a week. Then every other week. Then sometimes a month passed before the guards slid one through the slot. Each missing letter felt like another tie to the outside world snapping. Maybe Mama's tired of writing. Maybe she can't handle it no more. Maybe she gave up on me. Those thoughts stung worse than the fights. Worse than the loneliness. The breaking night. One night, he couldn't take it anymore. He sat on the edge of his bunk, head in his hands, tears dripping onto the concrete. He thought about ending it. Thought about finding a way to make the pain stop for good. The whispers in his head grew louder. Nobody cares. You're already dead. Might as well finish it yourself. His chest heaved. His fists clenched. His soul felt like it was crumbling. The Bible. His eyes drifted to the mattress. That Bible his mama had sent was still tucked under there, collecting dust. He hadn't opened it once. He pulled it out, stared at the cracked leather cover, and felt anger rise. "Where you at, God? If you real, why you let me end up here? If you love me, why you let me be 16 and chained like an animal? Why you let my mama cry herself to sleep?" His voice cracked, echoing off the walls. The anger turned into sobs. The sobs turned into silence. For a long time, he just sat there, Bible in his lap, waiting for an answer that didn't come. Darkness. The days after that blurred. He went through the motions: chow, yard, lockdown. His body moved, but his spirit was gone. He felt like a ghost, drifting through the tear. He didn't laugh. Didn't talk. Didn't fight unless he had to. One guard even muttered, "That kid ain't gonna last." And part of him believed it. Foreshadow. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know in that moment of hopelessness, was that God was already on his way. The silence wasn't abandonment. It was set up. Because the same Bible he cursed at was the one God was about to use to change his life. And the same cell that felt like a coffin was about to become holy ground. Chapter 8, The Encounter with God, Supernatural Moment. The cell was quiet that night. Too quiet. Most nights, there was always some noise: cards slapping on steel tables, fists banging, somebody cursing the guards, somebody screaming into the dark. But this night? Silence. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. He sat on his bunk, staring at the Bible in his lap. His mama's Bible. The same one he'd yelled at, cursed at, thrown against the wall more than once. Something told him, pick it up. The hesitation. He fought it at first. "Nah, man. That ain't me. I ain't no church boy. Ain't no preacher." But the voice inside pressed harder. Gentle, but firm. "Pick it up." His hands trembled as he flipped it open. The thin pages rustled, words blurring under the dim yellow light. His eyes fell on a verse. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Psalm 34 verse 18. He read it again. And again. Brokenhearted. Crushed in spirit. That was him. Every word was him. The vision. Then it happened. The air in the cell shifted. It wasn't heavy with fear anymore. It felt alive, like somebody else was in the room. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, looked around, nothing. But the presence was undeniable. And then, in his mind's eye, images flashed. Every robbery. Every fist fight. Every face he hurt. Every night his mama cried alone. It all played in front of him like a film reel. He couldn't look away. His chest tightened. His knees buckled, and he dropped to the floor. And in that darkness, another image appeared. A man. Hands scarred, pierced. Eyes so full of fire and love it scared him. And a voice said, "I'm doing this for you." The collapse. He broke. Tears poured out of him like floodgates bursting. 16 years of pain, anger, and hate spilling out on the concrete floor. He wept loud, ugly sobs that shook his whole body. For the first time, he didn't care who heard. Didn't care if the men down the tier called him weak. He cried out, "God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for every life I messed up, for every tear I made my mama cry, for every sin. If you still love me, please, please don't leave me like this." The presence. And the silence answered. But it wasn't empty silence. It was filled. A warmth wrapped around him, thick and undeniable. Like arms holding him, though no one was there. Like light pouring into a cave. The fear lifted. The shame lifted. The heaviness that had sat on his chest for months broke off like chains snapping. For the first time since the cuffs clicked on his wrists, he felt peace. The whisper. A whisper settled in his spirit. "You're mine now. I've been waiting for you." The words weren't loud, but they echoed louder than any threat he'd ever heard on the block. He pressed his forehead to the cold concrete and whispered back through tears. "Then take me. I ain't got nothing left but you." The change. He stayed there for hours, praying, crying, reading. Pages blurred by tears, but he didn't stop. When the lights clicked off for the night, he was still on the floor. When they clicked back on in the morning, he was still holding the Bible, still whispering prayers. Something had shifted. Something had broken. He wasn't the same. Couldn't be the same. The reactions. At first, other inmates laughed. "Yo, Shorty done found Jesus. Let's see how long that lasts." But he didn't care. The peace inside him was stronger than their jokes. And over time, the laughter quieted. Some even came to him late at night, whispering through the bars, "Pray for me too, man. I can't sleep." The same prison that almost killed him was now the place where he was learning how to truly live. Foreshadow. That night was the turning point. He entered his cell a lost teenager, chained by violence and despair. He came out a new man, chained instead to grace. The battles weren't over. The time wasn't over. But his soul was no longer on death row. Because God had stepped through the bars. And nothing, not prison, not gangs, not even the weight of 10 years, could undo that. Chapter 9, Transformation, Prayer, Discipline and New Purpose. The night God met him in that cell didn't erase his sentence. The steel doors still slammed shut every morning and every night. The guards still barked orders. The gang still watched him, waiting for him to slip. But inside, something had changed. The hunger. He woke up with a hunger he'd never felt before. Not for food. For the Word. That Bible his mama sent, the one he'd ignored, cursed at, and almost tossed away, became his lifeline. He read it at chow. Read it in the yard. Read it by the dim glow of the cell light until his eyes burned. And the more he read, the more the words came alive. If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. 2 Corinthians 5 verse 17. He whispered it to himself like a mantra. The old is gone. The new has come. The discipline. Prison life was chaos, but his cell became his sanctuary. Every morning, he got up before count, knelt by his bunk, and prayed. Every night before lights out, he prayed again. At first, the words stumbled out awkward, unsure. But over time, prayer became his rhythm, his anchor. When fights broke out in the yard, he walked away. When gangs tried to pull him back in, he shook his head. When temptation whispered, he answered with scripture. It wasn't easy. Every choice felt like a battle. But prayer gave him the strength to keep choosing right. The testing. The tests came quick. One day in the yard, a rival crew tried to provoke him. "Yo, Bible boy," one sneered, "you think your Jesus gonna save you out here?" The olden would have swung. But this time, he looked the man in the eye and said calmly, he already did. The yard went quiet. The men laughed nervously. But nobody swung. Later that night, one of the same men whispered through his bars, "Yo, can you pray for my daughter? She's sick." That's when he realized they weren't just watching him to see if he'd fail. They were watching him to see if his change was real. The influence. Word spread. Some started calling him preacher. At first it was a joke. But as days turned into months, the name stuck. Men who'd once threatened him now pulled him aside, asking questions about scripture. Guards noticed the shift in his demeanor, the calm that replaced the anger. He began leading small circles in the day room, reading psalms out loud. Some mocked. Others listened in silence. A few even joined him in prayer. The same prison that once stripped him of his name was now giving him a new one, man of God. Mama's joy. The day he wrote his mama, telling her he'd given his life to Christ, she wept tears of joy over the letter. "Son, I knew God wasn't finished with you. I told you, I've been praying for this day." her prayers had finally sprouted in the soil of a prison cell. Building purpose. He started journaling, writing down prayers, thoughts, verses that spoke to him. He didn't know it then, but those words would later shape his book, From a Convict to a Convert. He began seeing prison differently. Not just as punishment, but as preparation. Preparation for something bigger. Preparation for a future he couldn't imagine yet. The peace. The violence didn't stop. The gangs didn't disappear. The nights were still long. But he carried peace with him. Even when men cursed him. Even when guards mistreated him. Even when loneliness tried to creep back in. Because he knew now, he wasn't walking those tears alone. The fourth shadow. He didn't realize it then, but the same discipline he was building, prayer, scripture, leadership, was shaping him for the future. A future where he wouldn't just survive behind bars, but return to them. Not as an inmate, but as a leader. Because God doesn't just deliver. He redeems. Chapter 10, Redemption, Release, Leadership in God's Glory. The years crawled. Some days felt endless. But time, no matter how slow, still moves forward. And one day, the steel door opened, not for chow, not for the yard, but for release. Walking out, he stepped into the sunlight, the free air hitting his face like he was breathing for the first time. No chains on his wrists. No guards barking behind him. Just a second chance. He thought about his mama. How many nights she prayed for this day. How many tears she shed believing God wasn't finished with her boy. Now, here he was. But freedom came with its own battles. The streets whispered his name again. Old friends pulled up, offering quick money, old habits, old ways. He stood at the crossroads. The block on one side. God on the other. And he chose God. The return. Most men never want to see prison again. They run as far from it as they can. But God has a way of flipping the script. Not long after his release, Michael found himself back behind those same walls, only this time, wearing a badge. A juvenile correctional officer. He walked the same halls, heard the same doors slam, smelled the same stale air. But now, he wasn't there as a number. He was there as a leader. The kids locked inside looked at him the same way he once looked at older men, eyes full of anger, fear, and hopelessness. And he told them, "I've been where you at. But you don't gotta stay here. God's got more for you than these four walls." From inmate to lieutenant. Michael didn't stop there. His work ethic, his discipline, his integrity, all shaped by those years in prison and prayer, pushed him up the ranks. From officer, to sergeant, to lieutenant. A 16-year-old boy who once sat in chains was now in charge of the very system that once held him down. That wasn't just success. That was redemption. The book. But Michael knew his story wasn't just for the men inside. It was for the world. So he wrote it down. From a convict to a convert. Every page told the truth, the streets, the arrest, the darkness, the encounter with God, the transformation. It wasn't just a book. It was a testimony, proof that God can take what the enemy meant for evil and turn it for good. Ministry and music. Michael's voice carried further than prison walls. He began speaking at schools, churches, youth groups, anywhere people would listen. He shared his scars, his failures, and most of all, his God. He even poured his story into music, songs that preached hope instead of destruction, light instead of darkness. Because testimony ain't just words. It's a weapon. And Michael used his to free others long before they ever touched a jail cell. Mama's joy. For his mama, the greatest victory wasn't his uniform, his rank, or his book. It was seeing her son kneel in prayer. It was hearing him say, "Mama, your prayers worked." It was watching the boy who almost died in the streets become the man God promised he'd be. For the listener. And now, his story belongs to you. Because somebody watching this feels chained. Maybe not by prison bars, but by guilt, by shame, by addiction, by depression. You think you're too far gone. You think it's too late. Michael thought that too. At 16, he thought his life was over. But God said, "I'm not done." And He's not done with you either. The victory. From a scared boy in D.C. to a hardened teen in prison, to a broken soul on the floor of a cell, to a man of God, a lieutenant, a writer, a minister. That's not luck. That's not chance. That's God. The same God who met Michael behind bars is ready to meet you right where you are. Closing prayer. Father, thank you for taking what was broken and making it whole. Thank you for proving that no chain is too heavy, no past too dirty, and no child too lost for your mercy. Tonight, I pray for every person listening, that you would meet them in their darkest place the same way you met Michael. Break their chains. Heal their hearts. Show them that you still save. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. If Michael's story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs hope. Subscribe so you never miss another story of redemption. And remember, every story, every soul, every testimony ends the same way. From savage to saved.